With a sharp focus already on 2020, it appears that President Trump may have his work cut out for him whenever it comes to re-election. One conservative columnist and author is likening the GOP to a Trump cult.
In his book, The Conservative Sensibility, George Will argues that the conservatism has a long and distinguished pedigree of ideas, but an absence of cogent and actionable ideas is to blame for the current state of the GOP. And George Will joins us now to expand on those ideas. Great to have you, sir. Welcome.
Glad to be with you.
Well,
Tell us why you wanted to write this book at this time.
Well, you can curse the darkness or light a candle, and that's my candle. The conservative premise is not carried by either party right now. The natural rights, people say, do you want to conserve the American founding? And the founding is inherently limited government. There can be no more unlimited government than a government devoted to protectionism as we now are, government telling people what they can buy in what quantities and at what prices. So someone needs to say we've made a wrong turn. There's a reason why, as government's presence in our lives has increased, its prestige has plummeted. The case for limited government is all around us if someone will just articulate the case, and that's what I've tried to do.
Well, I've seen the rise in these books. Yours, I think, is the most seminal text on this. We had Jonah Goldberg also come out, and it's Ben Shapiro. It's the reckoning with the Renaissance and these values of liberalism. But I do want to address, Andrew Sullivan, I thought, had a pretty astute account in his review of your book in the New York Times. He said, this account of conservatism fails to address why it has collapsed as a political force in America in the 21st century, or how the political party that Will has supported for most of his adult life has rejected it decisively in favor of a strongman rule. Now, do you think it's because we're for lack of books like The Conservative Sensibility, or have the politics changed on this? Have the voters decided that they want something else?
There is a cohort in the American electorate that has said economic dynamism is too stressful. The frictions are too great. The pains are too intense. So we need to flinch, a big flinch from economic dynamism. The problem is the American people have no choice because of choices they've already made. They've made enormous promises to themselves, calls on the future productivity of the country through entitlement programs. And they need economic dynamism to pay the bills for these promises they've made. If they don't, we're going to have an ever more bitter distributional politics of a stagnant United States. Therefore, we need to recur to the premises that brought about what's been called the Great Enrichment, 2 centuries of astonishing growth.
But how is a candidate going to run on a platform of essentially saying we're going to have to get rid of much of these entitlement programs? I mean, this is what so many of the people vote for. I understand the responsible case that you're making, but in a 4-year, 8-year election cycle, how is that supposed to be politically viable?
I'm not making a case for getting rid of the entitlement programs. I know a settled question when I see one. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid are here to stay. Nothing wrong with that, but we have to pay for them.
Right.
And you cannot pay for them by saying we're going to have the presumption of rapid economic growth without the frictions. Now, government has to help people with the cost of these frictions, but as I say, the American people have made a choice, and the choice is the arithmetic of the unsustainability of the current entitlement programs. We're going to have means-tested entitlement programs. It's coming, but the root of all this is the dynamism of an open, free society, free from government rent-seeking that slows economic growth and slows the development of wealth for everyone.
So we obviously have our Trump here, but if you look around the world, this is far from an isolated phenomenon. You can look to Hungary and Orban, you can look to Le Pen, you can look to Bolsonaro. How did we get to this place where democracy and liberal democracy seems to be receding, and this comfort with authoritarianism seems to be on the rise?
Well, first of all, Orban is not typical of Europe. Le Pen is not typical of France. She's yet to win in France, it's worth noting.
Sure. But if you look, at the European parliamentary elections, you saw the center-right and the center-left both losing ground to the far right and to the Greens.
There's no question that this is a rising force around the world, but I don't think it's a majoritarian force yet. And if warning to my progressive friends, one way the Republicans got to this was by having, 17 or 18 people on stage at the beginning of a nominating process in which the most lurid stood out. They are up to what, 23 or 24 at this point?
Right. But is that, I mean, how do you change that? Because it's almost like a function of the media landscape and the social media landscape as it exists today. It's not an accident that in this age we have a reality TV star as president.
The way you change it is by argument. Americans are an argumentative people. If you don't like to argue, you pick the wrong country. But that's what makes it fun. Politics is fun. And the distinguished pedigree of the ideas that I write about in my book, from Madison through Lincoln and on, are, I think, successful. And as I say, the progressive friends should understand everything the progressives want to do depends on strong government and confidence in strong government. And they should be doubly concerned as to what's happened to the prestige of government in the last 50 years.
So to that point, how do you so statecraft is soulcraft is actually a good one of Mr. Will's original works, and you wrote about the necessity for a government to intertwine itself with the moral life of its citizens. That the idea that the government should be divorced from the sentiments and the manners and the morals opinions is ridiculous. How do you reconcile a limited government philosophy with that view? Because that does seem to be in conflict, and this is actually the subject of a big conservative debate that is happening right now, which is on whether the government should use its power in order to defend conservative ideals, or whether that we should work within the classical liberal framework in order to make sure that we can strike some sort of bargain.
Excellent question. In the decades that have passed since I published Statecraft to Soulcraft in 1983, I have come to appreciate more than ever before, and it's a large part of this book, the sense in which the spontaneous order of a market society is good for the soul. Capitalism doesn't just make us better off, it makes us better by enforcing certain virtues, thrift, industriousness, deferral of gratification, but most of all, the cooperation of a contractual society not superintended by government. Because when government deviates from free market policies very far, you get pandemic rent-seeking, interests bending government power to private purpose. Elizabeth Warren has a firm grip on half a point. She's quite right that it is no accident that 5 of the 10 wealthiest counties in the United States by per capita income are in the Washington area. She's right that government has been captured by interest groups that bend it to private advantage. But she then says, what we need to do to cure things is make government very much bigger, very much more intrusive in the allocation of wealth and opportunity. If you really want to improve the souls of the citizens and the quality of government, withdraw government from such a deep involvement in allocating wealth and opportunity.
But are people wrong? You said they're shrinking from economic dynamism. Are they wrong to look at this distribution of gains and say, this is unacceptable? Not that everybody has to be a millionaire, but that you've got the people who are service workers who can't afford to feed their family or even have a family and get married and afford to do that. You have that large sector of society, which is the majority of the jobs that are being created today. And then on the other hand, you've got the Jeff Bezoses of the world, you've got the Walton family that seem to be getting absolutely everything. So are people wrong to say, we've got to change this dynamic? I mean, if you look across the country, we have probably the worst addiction crisis in our history. We have suicides up. We have certain demographics whose life expectancy for the first time in American history are actually declining. What is that rot about, other than they feel this sense of hopelessness about their own prospects in this country?
The Walton family and Jeff Bezos after them got rich by providing enormous benefits to the broad mass of Americans through lower prices on common consumer goods and services.
That's one side of it. The other side of it is that Walmart sucked all of the sort of resources out of small towns, destroyed their main streets, and brought it into, the hands of a small elite.
Walmart didn't destroy Main Street. The people who used to shop on Main Street destroyed Main Street by going to the edge of town to the big box stores because they benefited.
Yeah. Well, I think the question is are we better off because we can buy a piece of plastic for 89 cents rather than the $1.10 that it used to cost?
Right.
And maybe that 20% might have been an intrinsic value and be able to shop at a store that we know at. But I also do want to ask you about 2020, because you said, you've assailed the Democratic Party here, and Elizabeth Warren, but you said last week that any Democrat would be better than re-electing President Trump. How do you reconcile that view?
The United States Senate. If the Senate remains in Republican control, then the legislative damage, regulatory damage can be done in appointments to the executive branch and all the rest. But if the Republicans control the Senate, they will control the Senate rules, so they will not be changed. And it will be impossible for the most extreme and shrill legislative measures to be passed. And it is possible to hope that the use of the semi-serious filibuster in the Senate will at long last do what the filibuster is supposed to do, which is force people to compromise by making life so inconvenient.
Do you share some of the concerns of other, both conservatives and Democrats, around monopoly power? We talked a little bit about Amazon. This is also, you know, in the food industry, in the agricultural industry. Has that essentially made it so that capitalism isn't effectively working?
I think capitalism is working. I mean, the fact is that if you had $100 million burning a hole in your pocket and you lived in Brazil or Italy, where would you want to send it? You'd send it to the United States because it was put to productive use. And the idea that because something is big, which Google obviously is, and Facebook and all the rest, it is a dangerous monopoly. You have a dangerous monopoly when you have a service people need and can't do without. I can do without Facebook. People did for a very long time. So the idea that mere size makes Facebook a dangerous public threat is illogical.
Final question for you, sir. You don't address immigration much in this book, and it really seems to be the seminal issue, at least of our time, but especially for Republican voters, is the #1 issue that they're looking at. Democrats are looking at health care. What are your views on immigration?
I believe immigration is an inherently entrepreneurial act. It's people uprooting themselves, taking a risk for themselves and their families. I think in a country where the baby boomers are retiring, where we have an aging workforce, where we have 7 million unfilled jobs at the moment, and we have people clamoring to get into our country and get to work, I'm for as much immigration as the economy can take. And the economy needs immigration just as much as the immigrants need the American economy.
Well, very interesting, and we really appreciate you joining us.
George, well, great to have you.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
So next on Rising, with all of the political drama and intrigue, people seem to be paying much more attention to the news than ever.
But is the industry as a whole healthy? We're going to look into big tech and its effect on journalism and ask our next guest if tech is making journalism sick. That when Rising returns.